Okay, so what do you know about Japan? You already know about Hello Kitty, and you probably know that Pikachu and all of his Pokemon friends are from Japan, and that Pokemon is played on the DS, made by the Japanese company Nintendo, which also happens to make the Wii. Whereas the PSP and PS4, those are made by Sony, another Japanese company. Japanese brand name recognition is most common with cars and motorcycles. Mitsubishi, Suzuki, Kawasaki, Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Daihatsu, Yamaha, and Mazda, those are all Japanese. But there are other Japanese products we may not know are Japanese. Japanese animation, for example. This is known as anime and has a significant presence here in our United States. Dragon Ball Z, Evangelion, Fist of the North Star, and Death Note are just a few examples of Japanese anime now well entrenched in American culture. It's also worth mentioning that the Transformers are originally Japanese. Here's the original Transformer robot Diaclone from 1980. The Japanese love robots. This Japanese scientist made a robotic copy from himself, and a well-known Japanese fashion model is in fact a robot. And here the robot Saya is teaching a class at a Tokyo primary school. Asimo, built by Honda, can independently climb stairs like a human. Technological achievements like this lead to other advances in helping the human condition, such as these prototypes for people that otherwise have no ability to walk. Japanese technology reaches into space also. Their additions to the International Space Station include this enormous laboratory, and their rocket program continues with the new Epsilon launching in 2013. Now, here back on Earth, Japanese technology is perhaps most evident in their bullet trains, called Shinkansen, which began moving people at high speed way back in 1964. Here's one of their more recent models, which has already been in service a number of years. The bullet trains are not just one or two or three railway lines, it's an entire network, which links all of Japan's major cities. In fact, when you include all the other train lines in the country, Japan has an amazing 9,650 train stations. This means you can go almost anywhere in Japan by train, and it is safe, comfortable, and quiet. It is the largest and most modern railway system in the world. Not surprisingly, some Japanese train stations are among the most beautiful and technologically sophisticated in the world. Here's a subway map of the Tokyo area. There are 924 stations, and they need them. Tokyo is huge. It is the most modern megalopolis in the world. Tokyo is filled with incredible architecture. Also, Japan is the world leader in making buildings earthquake-proof. However, my personal favorite is the new Kabuki Theater in Tokyo, made in the traditional Japanese style. But Tokyo is perhaps best known for its nightlife. There are thousands and thousands of small restaurants and bars throughout the city, most of them having a capacity of just a dozen people or so. And of course, at many of those establishments, karaoke is very popular. Karaoke is a Japanese creation, so it's not surprising to find out that karaoke is in fact a Japanese word, which translates literally as empty orchestra. Tokyo also has a reputation for what is now known as Tokyo street fashion. The Japanese are impeccable dressers, not just in Tokyo, but throughout the entire country. Attention to detail is a very Japanese characteristic found not just in old and new fashion styles, but in their daily lives as well. It is this attention to detail that explains, in part, why Japan is so incredibly clean. A person visiting Japan will immediately notice that the streets, be they in country towns or big cities, are immaculate. And members of a community, they feel collectively responsible for the environment around their home and workplace, and everyone pitches in. As students, they clean their own schools. The trains are clean and have curtains in the windows. Bus and taxi drivers wear white gloves. And taxi doors open automatically for you, and the seats are covered with fresh linens. Now, even the toilet will clean and dry you, if you can figure out how to use it. Now, it is a Japanese custom to remove your shoes when entering a home and to wear the slippers provided, and this is true for many public places as well. That's why socks are just as important as your choice of hat or necktie, and why thousands of styles exist. At this public place, someone has returned their slippers facing in the wrong direction. This is very un-Japanese. Everyone has a community responsibility, and collective attention to detail allows the society to function and progress. In Japan, everything has its place, from the placement of various dishes for dinner to the symbolic stones of an ancient Zen rock garden. Establishing the proper place for everything creates harmony, and harmony is integral to the Japanese sense of beauty. And this is true for its language also. The words, grammar, and tone you use when speaking to someone will depend on whether they are older, the same age, or younger than you. It also depends on whether the person holds a position similar to that of your boss, your coworker, or your employee. Additionally, it depends on whether you're speaking to a male or female and whether you know the person or they're a stranger to you. Now, all of this depends on whether you yourself are male or female and whether you're a senior, middle-aged, or a youth. Of course, we do this to some extent with American English also, but with Japanese the etiquette is much more detailed and complex. Putting the correct words, grammar, and tone into proper place can be something of an art form. This is in part what Japanese geisha are in fact known for, not just as entertainers, but as masters of conversation, and certainly not the misconstrued Western perception of being prostitutes. Written Japanese is just as complex and sophisticated as its spoken form. You need to know over 2,000 kanji characters just to read a newspaper, and you could spend a lifetime studying over 50,000 of them. The kanji are read in conjunction with two other alphabets, hiragana, which assists in properly reading the kanji, and katakana, which is used for names and words that are foreign. Now, here are the kanji for the word Japan, and they are read from left to right just as we would read the English. However, kanji are more commonly read from top to bottom, and columns of kanji text are then read from right to left. This is why what we would consider the back cover of a book or magazine is actually the front cover for the Japanese. Now, the first kanji here is pronounced nichi, and the second kanji is pronounced hon. Together they create the word Nihon, which is the Japanese name of their country, Japan. The kanji nichi means sun, and the kanji hon means origin. Taken together, the meaning of the word Nihon, Japan, is land of the rising sun, and that is why their flag is a depiction of the sun. So what sports are popular in the land of the rising sun? Well, soccer is certainly one of them. The men's national team qualified to play in the last 5 World Cups and secured second-round advancements in 2 of them, and they have won the Asian Cup a record 4 times. The women's national team won the World Cup in 2011. Here, at the end of a friendly soccer match, American elementary students from Misawa Air Base in Japan teach their Japanese friends how to shake hands, a practice becoming more common in Japan, although bowing remains the predominant form of greeting. Swimming is also popular in Japan, and 4-time gold medalist Kosuke Kitajima is a household name. World champion and Olympic medalist Aya Terakawa is seen here congratulating American Missy Franklin for having just beaten her for an Olympic gold medal. This display of sportsmanship and class is typical of the Japanese mentality. They are honest and honorable people. Golf is also very popular in Japan. In 2012, Hideki Matsuyama reached number 1 in the World Amateur Golf Ranking, and Ai Miyazato has won 8 LPGA tournaments since 2010. These are just 2 of the many amazing golfers that come from Japan. But there are other sports that are uniquely Japanese, and perhaps the most popular is that of sumo. Before a match begins, the 2 competitors toss salt into the ring as a symbolic purification. A sumo wrestler must then push his opponent out of the ring or make him touch the ring with any part of his body other than his feet. A first-time observer might think that sumo wrestlers are just very large, overweight men, but in fact, sumo technique is highly refined, and sumo wrestlers begin studying it at a very young age. Better known in the United States is the Japanese martial art of karate, the kanji of which means empty hand. This is not karate, and this is not karate. This is karate. Kendo. The character for ken means sword, and the character for do means the way. Thus, kendo is the way of the sword. It employs a bamboo pole split at one end and then bound together. Although not a steel sword, it is still very dangerous, and thus kendo is practiced with ample protection. You might have already guessed that the sport of kendo developed from the methods samurai used to practice for battle. Now, judo is another uniquely Japanese sport and martial art. It uses the power of your opponent against himself to take him down. The kanji for judo mean gentle way, and its techniques are often seen in mixed martial arts competitions. This is Keiko Fukuda, and she is a master of judo. Her grandfather was a samurai, and you can see his portrait hanging in the left side of this photo. She learned judo from its creator, the great Kano Jigoro, whose photo you can see hanging to the right. She moved to the United States in 1966 so she could teach her art to Americans in a country that she loved very much. She's the only woman in the world, ever, to have achieved a 10th degree black belt in judo, which is actually a red belt, as you can see her wearing here. In early 2013, at the age of 99, she passed away in her home in San Francisco. Her personal motto was, "Be gentle, kind, and beautiful, yet firm and strong, both mentally and physically." So what is the most popular sport in Japan? Baseball. That's right, American baseball. A U.S. Civil War veteran, Horace Wilson, he was teaching in Tokyo and introduced baseball to his students in 1872. Hiroshi Hiraoka, who had been studying in Boston, he then returned to Japan and started the first professional team in 1878. And the Japanese, well, they've been loving the sport ever since. Babe Ruth went to Japan in 1934 and visited with his Hiroshima high school team. Baseball continues to bring our two countries together. The pitching of Yu Darvish of the Texas Rangers continues to impress, and Ichiro Suzuki of the New York Yankees trails only Pete Rose and Ty Cobb for all-time hits. High school teams here from Yokohama and Southern California play friendly matches, and more should be encouraged. The championship game of the 2012 Little League World Series brought together teams from Tokyo and Tennessee. Pitching phenom Kotaro Kiyomiya threw a fastball to phenom Brock Myers. Brock hit a home run. As Brock rounded the bases and landed home, Kotaro approached him and congratulated him for such a great hit, showing once again that Japan and the United States share not only a common love of sport, but an affinity for mutual respect and friendship. Although the Tokyo team won the championship, they had made a point to parade on the field holding both the Japanese and American flags together. When the Great Tsunami of 2011 wiped out entire cities in Japan, it was baseball, among other things, that helped the nation come together and heal itself. Now that we've covered sports, including kendo, it might be a good time to talk a little bit about the samurai. Although the samurai were absolutely masters of the sword, they were originally, first and foremost, mounted archers. That's right, samurai were horsemen and experts of the bow and arrow. Now, if they lost use of their bow or were engaged in close combat, their secondary weapon was the naginata, which is something like a spear with a sword-like tip. If that in turn was lost or unavailable, it was then that the samurai would turn to their third choice of weapon, and the one that we most closely associate them with, the samurai sword. The samurai sword is typically held with two hands, and they are razor sharp. They are the best swords ever made in the world, and the secret lies in the manner in which they were constructed. The number of times each type of steel would be pounded out and folded repeatedly, and the manner in which it was cooled, was very important. But central to success was the use of different kinds of steel. A low-carbon steel, to give the sword flexibility, would be bound to a high-carbon steel to give the sword its hard, sharp edge. Sometimes a medium-carbon steel was used also, as in this demonstration of the Honsanmai method. There are many variations of this, but the Soshu Kite method is considered the best. It used 7 different layers of 3 types of steel, and was created and perfected by Goron-Yodo Masamune in the late 13th century. He's considered to have built the best samurai swords ever, and considering that samurai swords are the best swords in the world, that's saying a lot. Now, let me tell you about the greatest samurai duel ever, kind of like the Japanese equivalent of the OK Corral. In 1612, the master swordsman Sasaki Kojiro had accepted a challenge, and arrived on time at the designated location, a beach. His challenger, the great Miyamoto Musashi, arrived by boat on the beach. But while on his way, he had carved a wooden sword from an oar he found on the boat. Musashi showed up more than 3 hours late, and this unbalanced Kojiro's temper and thus his ability to fight with a clear mind, as did the fact that Musashi was challenging him with a wooden sword, an insulting gesture to a swordsman as great as Kojiro. Once the two engaged each other, Kojiro came very close to dealing the winning blow with his long sword style and use of his much-feared swallow cut. But Musashi had positioned himself with the sun behind him, and at just the right moment, he struck a single, deadly blow. A statue now stands where the famous duel took place more than 400 years ago. Although some still debate the integrity of Musashi's methods, the outcome was no stroke of luck for him. Musashi is arguably the greatest swordsman to have ever lived. Historic records indicate that in 1596, at the age of just 13, Musashi accepted a public challenge from an established samurai, Arima Kihei, and beat him to death with a staff. At the age of 16, Musashi left home and wandered the country for much of his life as a ronin, a masterless samurai, and quickly became legend. He created and perfected a two-sword fighting technique called Niten Ichiryu, and was an expert in throwing weapons, especially his short sword, seen here in this self-portrait. But Musashi was a thinking man also, and a spiritual man, and his greatest legacy is the timeless discourse on strategy, The Book of Five Rings, read by business people and athletes just as much as by military people, and has been translated hundreds of times into dozens of languages over the centuries. Speaking of books, it's worth mentioning that the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji, is Japanese. It was written by Murasaki Shikibu in the early 11th century. The central character is Genji, the son of the emperor, and there are approximately 400 other characters. So as you might have guessed, The Tale of Genji is prolific. In English translations, it's well over 1,000 pages long. Now, as with sports, in the arts, there are many that are uniquely Japanese. Kabuki theater still uses all-male actors, much as original Shakespeare theater did. Ikebana, the art of flower arranging, can be a lifelong endeavor as the student or master seeks a perfectly balanced representation of natural beauty. No, a type of musical drama dating back to the 13th century, is performed on a small square pavilion stage along with the musicians, and the performer is often masked. Chado is the way of tea, the tea ceremony. As with any martial art, there are many different tea schools. Of course, the point is not the tea itself, but that you have put your body, mind, and soul into the production of it for your guests. Since we're talking about the arts, we should consider the Japanese aesthetic. The Japanese love cherry blossoms, and I believe this is not just because they are small, cute, and beautiful, but that they bloom very quickly, yet last a very short time. The brevity and beauty of life must be cherished before it passes. You'll find cherry blossoms everywhere in Japan, on their cars, in their anime, on their shoes and fingers, and most definitely in their tattoos. The Japanese gifted over 3,000 cherry blossom trees to the United States in 1912. You can still see them when you visit our great capital, Washington, D.C. Admired even more than the cherry blossom is Japan's Mount Fuji, with its enormous size but graceful, sloped incline. If the soul of Japan resides anywhere, it is in beloved Mount Fuji, especially during cherry blossom season. Film can give you some sense of the Japanese aesthetic. I highly recommend Akira Kurosawa's 1954 The Seven Samurai, and you should follow that up with his 1985 masterpiece, Ran. Then check out The Quirky Departures and the very moving Nobody Knows. Witness the closing chapter of the warrior class in The Twilight Samurai, and then experience the perfect melding of anime and story in Spirited Away. If you have the patience, finish off with Shinji Aoyama's nearly 4-hour emotional epic, Eureka. Now, if you like sequels, then for fun, you can watch all 28 Zatoichi films, which follow the exploits of a blind swordsman as he battles, of course, against impossible odds. If that's not enough, move on to the 1954 Godzilla and continue with 27 sequels made over the course of 50 years. For the Japanese, 50 years is nothing. As you've probably noticed by now, a Japanese culture is measured in centuries and millennia. For example, the current emperor of Japan, Akihito, is the 125th generation of the same family to hold the imperial throne. Here he is laying a wreath, assisted by a U.S. Marine, at the National Memorial Cemetery in Honolulu, Hawaii. His father, Hirohito, was an emperor, seen here with Ronald Reagan in 1983. And his grandfather was an emperor, and his great-grandfather was an emperor, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, all the way back to Emperor Jimmu, who began his rule in the year 660 BC. The 7th century BC also marks, approximately, the beginning of Japan's indigenous religion, Shinto. Central to Shinto are kami. These are not gods, but spirits. More specifically, you could say that a kami is the essence of something. The kami of a tree, a rock formation, or animal, for example. Or when a loved one dies, they continue as a kami. The closest equivalent in Christianity would be an angel. Shinto is ritualistic and performed at Shinto shrines, easily identified by their, usually, orange entrance gate, some of which are huge. The people go to a Shinto shrine for a variety of reasons: purification, to attend a festival, or to ask for good fortune in life, and many other things. Shinto's not a religion in the Western sense. In fact, many Japanese themselves say Shinto is not a religion. It's simply a way of life for many Japanese. This almost certainly explains why so many Japanese that partake in Shinto ceremony in one way or another are also Buddhist, the other major religion in Japan. Buddhism has been practiced in Japan for about 1,500 years. This is the 13th century bronze statue of the Buddha at Kotoku Temple in Kamakura. Now, as in Christianity, Buddhism has many different branches, but I can tell you that the common link among them all is for the practitioner to work toward enlightenment, as represented by these 1,000 statues at Sanjusan Gendo in Kyoto. Now, enlightenment, also called nirvana, is pursued through the practice of meditation. Through meditation, you calm the body, the mind, and the spirit, and allow your misconceptions of the world to fade. The idea being that this allows you to more clearly see the world for how it truly is. Let's take a quick look at that world. First, let's change our perspective a bit and center this map around the Pacific Ocean, across which the US and Japan do so much trade together. Okay, we can see the lower 48, Alaska and Hawaii in the color blue, and the islands of Japan in the color red here. Now, let's zoom in a little bit. Okay, let's go over some interesting statistics regarding Japan and the United States. Let's begin with population. The United States has about 317 million people, making it the third most populated country in the world. Japan has about 127 million people, making it the 10th most populated country in the world. Remember, there are almost 200 countries in the world, so 10th largest population is nothing to sneeze at. Just as interesting is Japan's geographic size. It's actually a bit smaller than the state of California. So imagine 40% of US citizens living just in California, and you get an idea of how densely populated Japan really is. Okay, the economy. The most common measure of a nation's economic power is the gross domestic product, or GDP. The GDP measures the total value of goods produced and services performed in the country. The United States had a GDP in 2012 of about $16 trillion, making it the largest economy in the world. In the same year, Japan had a GDP of $5.3 trillion, establishing it as the world's third largest economy. Considering that the US is the third most populated country, but has the largest economy in the world, and that Japan is the 10th most populated, but has the third largest economy in the world, both the US and Japan are, without a doubt, economic powerhouses among the world's nearly 200 countries. If you take the GDP of a country and divide by its population, you get GDP per capita. This measures the average value that a single individual puts into their country. It's one good measure of how well off the population of a country is. In 2012, the GDP per capita of the United States was $51,000, making its citizens the seventh most productive in the world. In Japan, that number was $41,000, making the Japanese citizen the 16th most productive in the world. It may seem that there's a big difference between 7th and 16th, but in fact both countries remain well within the top 10% of the world's nations in terms of citizen productivity. Hybrid vehicles. I found this one interesting. Despite being slightly less wealthy than their American friends, the Japanese are much more eager to purchase the more expensive, fuel-efficient hybrid vehicle. In the United States, recent sales of hybrid vehicles accounted for 3% of total vehicle sales nationwide. In Japan, an astounding 20% of all vehicle sales are hybrid vehicles. Life expectancy. The average life expectancy in Japan is 84 years old, giving them the third longest life expectancy in the world. In the United States, the average life expectancy is 79 years old, putting them in the rank of 51st. The difference between third and 51st sounds enormous, but in fact it's just 5 years. Not insignificant, but not exactly earth-shattering. Homicide. This one is a bit earth-shattering. Japan is incredibly safe. There's very little theft and very little violence. With a homicide rate of just 0.3 people per 100,000 people, it is the third safest country in the world. Unfortunately, the US rate is 4.7 murders per 100,000, making it the 105th safest country in the world. In other words, the murder rate in the United States is 1,567% higher than it is in Japan. Interestingly enough, the suicide rate in Japan is about 100% higher than that of the United States. I think this is due to the fact that pressures to conform to social norms are much higher in Japan, and thus a greater number of people break under that stress. Infant mortality. This measures the number of infants that die before the age of 1 per 1,000 live births. In Japan, that rate is 2.2 per 1,000, giving it the second lowest rate of infant mortality in the world. In the United States, the rate is 5.2, giving it the 43rd lowest rate in the world. Infant mortality is often a good measure of the quality of medical services available in that country. Education. The Japanese are highly educated. 95% of all Japanese complete high school. This is the fourth highest rate among the world's nations. For the United States, the figure stands at 76%, giving us the rank of 21st. Not terrible, but certainly leaving room for improvement. Corruption. Transparency International's yearly corruption index measures nearly all of the world's countries and territories. Both Japan and the United States ranked relatively well. Japan was measured as being the 18th least corrupt country in the world, and the United States was measured as being the 19th least corrupt country in the world. And finally, for the degree to which a country is a functioning democracy, the Economist's Intelligence Unit ranked both Japan and the United States as the 23rd and 21st most democratic countries on Earth, respectively. Over the past 25 minutes or so, you've hopefully discovered some interesting things about Japan. The United States and Japan now stand in the 21st century as the two most powerful, modern, highly functioning democracies in the world. The survival of each depends on the other. We need each other, not just for mutual economic gain, but for higher principles, for our mutual love of democracy and freedom, principles under constant threat in a strife-ridden world. If you haven't already, please watch the short video Allies posted on this website. You'll then understand why Japan and the Japanese people are so important to the United States. Failure to recognize this, failure to learn about Japan, and failure to strengthen our friendship with the Japanese does nothing more than weaken our own country and put it at risk in the future. Then watch the short video Go West to Japan to find out how I'm riding a horse over 5,000 miles across our great country to help Americans understand why our future depends on a strong understanding of and strong relationship with the Japanese people. You can follow my horseback expedition by checking out the regularly updated content in Follow Me. I'm taking 2 years off from work to prepare for and execute this trip, and so of course donations are most welcome. And finally, I want to thank you for taking an interest in Japan, for taking the time to explore this website, and for considering our nation's future. Thank you.